So some breaking news that we've just it's been announced over the last 5-10 minutes or so, maybe even less than that, and it's the really sad news that WWE Hall of Famer Pat Patterson has passed away. Now, WWE made this announcement, as I mentioned, just several minutes ago. They posted on their official website, WWE.com, as well as their social media pages, that indeed WWE Hall of Famer Pat Patterson has passed away. I'll read you the statement that they have put on their website. It says, quote, WWE is saddened to learn that Pat Patterson has passed away at the age of 79. A true trailblazer of the industry, Patterson was linked to many firsts in sports entertainment throughout his storied career, including the first ever Intercontinental Championship reign, the creation of the Royal Rumble match. In a career spanning 6 decades, the Renaissance man left an indelible mark on the industry in the ring and on the microphone and behind the scenes. Patterson began his career in 1958 and was in his native Canada before becoming a fixture in the Bay Area for nearly 2 decades. After winning the AWA Tag Team Championship with Ray Stevens in 1987, Patterson moved on to WWE. Under the tutelage of the Grand Wizard, Patterson made an immediate impact and became the first Intercontinental Champion in September 1979. Patterson's most legendary WWE rivalry was undoubtedly his war with Sergeant Slaughter, which captivated the WWE Universe with boot camp matches and a brutal alley fight at Madison Square Garden. It then goes on to talk about, of course, his in-ring retirement in 1984, joining Vince McMahon as a color commentator, and even after hanging up his boots, Patterson was far from finished in reimagining the possibilities of the sports entertainment industry. In 1988, Patterson brought one of the ring's most groundbreaking ideas to life by creating the original format for the Royal Rumble match. It also talks about his run in the Attitude Era, creating many memorable moments alongside Gerald Briscoe as one of Mr. McMahon's hilarious stooges. Patterson even pinned Crash Holly to claim the Hardcore Championship. Patterson was eventually inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 1996 by Bret Hart, and it's incredibly sad. First of all, everyone here at WrestleNews 365, we extend our condolences to Patterson's family and friends. Absolutely, I'm shell-shocked. I really am shell-shocked. You never do see these things coming, but nevertheless, it's absolutely shocking. It's incredibly sad, incredibly heartbreaking. If you know anything about pro wrestling, if you know anything about WWE, you will know the importance of Pat Patterson to WWE. They mentioned there about his career in the ring. Arguably, what was even more groundbreaking and even more important was his career outside of the ring when it comes to WWE. The big boom of WWF back in the 80s, obviously Vince McMahon, the genius behind Vince McMahon of going national, WrestleMania, etc., Hulkamania, all that kind of stuff. You can't ignore the importance of someone like Pat Patterson during that period of time. He really was Vince McMahon's right-hand man. Every single person you will speak to that has ever held a position of being an official or being on the creative team or putting matches together will talk about the genius of Pat Patterson, the genius of what that man brought to the WWE in terms of creative ideas, creative finishes for matches. Eric Bischoff regularly talks about Pat Patterson being the greatest finish man in the history of pro wrestling. Eric Bischoff says that if he managed to get Pat Patterson over to WCW during the height of the Monday Night War, then they would have won the war, because that was the thing that was lacking in his mind in WCW was finishes. And any pro wrestler you talk to that's ever competed in WWE, they call Pat Patterson a genius. I think Chris Jericho calls him Yoda. He calls him the Yoda of pro wrestling because he knows everything. He knows everything. He knows how to lay out a match, how to lay out a finish, how to lay out everything. He was a genius. He absolutely was a genius. His psychology outside of the ring and inside of the ring, he was a genius. So it's incredibly shocking and it's incredibly heartbreaking. But like the article says on him, like the statement that WWE release has said on him, is he added so much to the pro wrestling business. It can't be understated. I mean, even the words that I'm saying now probably don't justify the importance of Pat Patterson to pro wrestling and WWE. The amount that this guy helped come up with, innovate, establish it's words can't even do it justice. It really can't. They mentioned the man came up with the Royal Rumble match. The Royal Rumble pay-per-view match at this point is so big. I mean, it's a staple of the pay-per-view calendar this year. Some people even argue now it's the pay-per-view they look forward to the most, not even WrestleMania. People talk about how they look forward to, obviously, WrestleMania season. That kicks off with the Royal Rumble. And some people, I mean, I probably myself included, it's probably my favorite pay-per-view of the year. For all the grandeur and glamour of WrestleMania, the Royal Rumble is just pure excitement, and it's the indication of where they're going to go for WrestleMania and the rest of the year, quite frankly, for that. All of that is because of Pat Patterson. This guy invented the Royal Rumble match. He came up with the Royal Rumble match, and for years and years, in addition to that, when they would have Royal Rumble matches, they would bring Pat Patterson in to lay out the Royal Rumble match, to lay out, okay, you go in at this time, you throw out this guy, you come in and you interact with this person, you do this, you're coming at this point, you coming at that point. So it's the amount that he added to the WWE is just without question. In addition to that, I mean, Pat Patterson, he shattered stereotypes as well during his time with the WWE. He released his autobiography in 2016 called Accepted, How the First Gay Superstar Changed WWE, and that was groundbreaking as well. Everyone knew about Pat Patterson's sexuality. It was kind of an open secret, but he officially revealed that he was a gay man back in, I think it was 2015, 2014, it was during the Legends House TV series. And again, that in pro wrestling is, and it shouldn't be, but in certain cases in pro wrestling it's a taboo subject, and Pat Patterson managed to shatter the stereotypes when it comes to that. That's what this guy did throughout his life and throughout his career, was shatter stereotypes, and contributed so much to the WWE, and he will be very sorely missed by the wrestling community as a whole, and by WWE, and by everyone involved in WWE. I mean, the amount that this guy contributed to the product, to pro wrestlers' careers, to matches, to outcomes. Some of the greatest matches in WWE history have been worked on by Pat Patterson because of his genius, because of his finish that he added to the match, or because of his expertise. That match went from, a 7 to a 10. That was Pat Patterson. That was how invaluable he was. As I mentioned, Chris Jericho called him Yoda because he knew everything. He knew absolutely everything, and it felt like with Pat Patterson that just everything he touched turned to gold. He was every sort of great thing that you hear about WWE, whether it is in the 80s or the early 90s or even the Attitude Era, everyone, when you ask them about it, they'll go, oh yeah, Pat Patterson was involved in that. Pat Patterson gave us, the direction for that. When it comes to WrestleMania 12, right, the Iron Man match, 60-minute Iron match, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart. The story goes that Vince McMahon wasn't keen on having a 60-minute match, a 60-minute main event for the WWE Championship, and Pat Patterson was pushing for that. He was like, these are the two guys, they can do it, they can pull it off. And of course he was right. He was always right. And even over the last couple of years, Pat Patterson hasn't been there all the time. When he has been there, people will come up to him, or would come up to him and say, what do you think of this match? What do you think of this finish? What do you think of this outcome? To see what his opinion was, and 9 times out of 10, or probably 10 times out of 10, every single time he would say, you could maybe add in this, and it's like the most genius thing you've ever heard of, and you just go, oh, I can't believe I didn't think of that. And that was the genius of Pat Patterson. There won't be other people like Pat Patterson. There just won't. People that can contribute that much to the pro wrestling business, people that can contribute that much to the WWE. The WWE, as I mentioned earlier on, it is what it is today because of the likes of Vince McMahon and, like I said, the rise of Hulkamania in the 80s, but it's also because of the genius of people like Pat Patterson. It absolutely is. I mean, again, you can probably talk to any big star in WWE over the last, 20, 40 years in WWE, and every single one will tell you how Pat Patterson influenced their career, how Pat Patterson came up with some innovative concept, some innovative finish, helped them during their career, taught them wisdom, all this kind of stuff. I mean, I have heard a million different interviews with people stating the genius of Pat Patterson. So this loss is huge. It's absolutely massive. It's a huge loss to not only the WWE, but professional wrestling in general. And as I mentioned, he is one of the most, pioneering people in pro wrestling. He really is. And his contributions to the business are unparalleled, whether it is adding in the Royal Rumble, or pushing for people like Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart to be world champion, or pushing for Vince McMahon to put in the Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12, or pushing for people's careers, or pushing for people's finishes, all that kind of stuff. It's unparalleled. And then they mentioned in the statement there, and then in the Attitude Era, he had this renaissance as an on-screen character. Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe as the Stooges, they were incredible. they really were incredible. I've been over the last sort of year or so, I've been going back and watching all of these Attitude Era shows from sort of the start of '97 to see the growth there. Pat Patterson as well and Gerald Briscoe, they were a big part of that as part of the corporation. Vince McMahon's Stooges, their segments were unbelievable. Their segments were incredible, genuinely funny. Comedy in pro wrestling, we know how hard it is to do, but the comedy between Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe was so over the top and so hilarious that it works. They were back for the Raw reunion, was it last year? Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe, and it worked then as well. And it worked because you could tell they were genuinely friends. They were obviously genuinely workmates as well. But it was the chemistry there. And, how could, I think Vince Russo spoken about it a few times ago, and how could you not write something genius for them? Everything he gave them, they made it work. And they were huge characters in the show, and they were incredibly over. There's stories about having a main event of Pat Patterson versus Gerald Briscoe as the Stooges, outdrawing a match on Nitro that involved like Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, etc., Goldberg and all that kind of stuff. It got outdrawn by Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe. Now, obviously that's because the show was over at the time, but that's because the characters were over at the time. That shows that, again, you can't take the greatness out of the performer. And they were involved in it. They were involved in like great matches. I think of Over the Edge in 1998, that match between Dude Love and Stone Cold Steve Austin. The finish of that match was unbelievable. The finish of that match involved The Undertaker coming out and choke slamming both Gerald Briscoe and Pat Patterson through the announce tables at ringside. He took his fair amount of stunners from Steve Austin in the Attitude Era as well, and that was just in front of the camera. As I mentioned, behind the scenes, he was invaluable. He was absolutely invaluable. Everything that you saw on WWE TV in the 80s, the 90s, and probably some stuff in the early 2000s as well, had Pat Patterson's fingerprints all over it. He would come in for Royal Rumbles. Even, I don't know how far back it goes now, but he would come in for Royal Rumbles and give his assistance, help people lay it out. He would come in for WrestleManias, help people lay out the main events. Why? Because he was a genius. He was the Yoda. And on top of that, he's the first ever Intercontinental Champion in WWE history, winning the title in that tournament in Rio de Janeiro. It's just, I mean, the man's career to be honest, it's unparalleled. With the amount that he's given to the business. It's up there in WWE with the likes of Vince McMahon. He was that important. He was that important with all that he offered the WWE, all that he helped add to the industry. And again, his legacy is really going to be unparalleled, maybe only by Vince McMahon. He added that much to the business. So he will be... It's just a massive, massive loss, and it's just a heartbreaking thing to see. As soon as the news popped up on my phone, your heart sinks, and it's incredibly sad. And like I said previously, I extend my condolences and thoughts to Pat Patterson's family and friends, and it's an incredibly, incredibly sad piece of news. And just 2020, what a horrible year. 2020 has just been an absolute dumpster fire of a year. I've said it a million times at this point. It just feels like it continues to get worse and worse, doesn't it, with the news of now Pat Patterson's passing as well. It's just incredibly sad. And like I said, he won't be forgotten. He's a pioneer of so many different avenues when it comes to WWE, whether it's the first Intercontinental Champion, creating the Royal Rumble match, being the best finish man in the business, being the man behind so many big people's pushes throughout their careers and fighting for people to main event WrestleManias or get given the opportunity of being a world champion or given the opportunity of having a great match with a great finish, creating the Royal Rumble match, as I said previously, and also being an openly gay man, coming out and being an openly gay man in the latter period of his life, but he was openly gay throughout the entirety of his life. There's been so many stories about Pat Patterson telling people openly, I think it's Gerald Briscoe, the first time I met him, he said, "I'm a gay man, I hope you don't have a problem with that." And he said, "Not at all." This is a man in a pro wrestling business. That's not easy to do. So obviously, again, massive miss to the company. It's a huge loss. It's a huge loss, not just to WWE, but to pro wrestling in general. And as I mentioned previously, my thoughts and prayers are with his family and his friends. And obviously, we don't have any details more about Pat Patterson's passing. I'm sure WWE were probably first to know, and they were notified by the family. If we obviously get any more information, we can report on that later on. But it's not about that at the moment. It's about celebrating the life and the career and the contributions of Pat Patterson to the WWE and the pro wrestling business in general. So Pat Patterson, rest in peace, and once again, our thoughts and prayers go out to his family.